Something I see pretty frequently on YouTube is people building so-called gaming PCs for supposedly $100 that are presumably good. But a lot of the time, to me, this feels like you have to do some serious deal hunting and, unfortunately, talk to people in person to find the best deals. So, I wanted to see if this really is just luck of the draw, or if it would be possible to find the parts to make a $100 PC without dedicating an entire salaried work week to finding parts at bargain bin prices. So my search started and ended with eBay, because I don't have to interact with other human beings, and it's a little more accessible and doesn't constrain you to only local deals. So it's a little easier to actually build one of these PCs yourself. I started looking for ThinkStation P310s because I just like Lenovo and the prices are pretty good, especially if you want to get a Skylake CPU, since you'll be able to get a newer socket and DDR4 RAM, leading to a much better upgrade path. But from my one day of searching, I didn't really see any ThinkStations that were a good price but could also fit the 2 hard drives I eventually wanted to put in mine. If you wanted to just throw an SSD in there and call it a day, you might be able to find a better deal than me with the better upgrade path if you do go with a small form factor PC, but you might need a half-size GPU depending on the case. In my case, I decided to go for a regular size PC with DDR3 and an LGA 1150 socket motherboard because I personally needed at least 2 3.5-inch hard drive bays and wanted more GPU options. The bigger, non-small form factor desktops generally cost more though, so I ended up with a Dell Optiplex 9020 bare bones for $37.40 with free shipping. It did not come with a CPU, RAM, or any form of storage at all, so I had to pick those up as well. I decided to get a Xeon. It is an E3 1226 V3. Great naming scheme, Intel. But it has pretty similar performance to an i7 2600K or an i5 4670K for about half the price, coming out to just $14.96 for a 4-core, 4-thread CPU. It just doesn't have hyperthreading. But that didn't really seem to hurt the performance of this PC too much for gaming. I'm sure there are better deals out there for cheap CPUs, but I noticed LGA 1150 Xeons tend to go for a bit cheaper than their core counterparts in general. For RAM, I have too much DDR3 RAM lying around already, so I just threw in some that I had lying around and budgeted $20 for 8 gigabytes of DDR3. You could probably get 12 or 16 gigs if you looked around enough for a decent deal, but I think this 8 gigabyte DIMM was around $15 for me when I got it. I actually somehow ended up with 12 gigs of just random RAM in here due to my RAM dying, but I'll talk about that later. For the SSD, this is the only part of the system that was new, and it was also on sale, look at that. I got mine for about $12, and last, but somewhat least, if we're being honest with ourselves, the GPU. With hardly anything left in the budget, unfortunately, there was not much more I was able to really find other than a GTX 650. So for $30 sad, I was able to get a GTX 650. So with all of that, let's build this thing. Because this is a bare bones PC, the motherboard and power supply are already in it. So you just need to pop off the CPU cooler, drop your new CPU in, making sure none of the pins on the motherboard are bent, then lock it in place with the retention arm, put some thermal paste on, then screw in your CPU cooler. Then plug in the fan. Next, RAM. Just plop it in there, make sure it's seated. It's RAM. SSD, just throw that in somewhere, I don't know. Hook up power, SATA, super easy. And lastly, the big boy, the GPU. Wow, this is a really small GPU actually. Because of the power supply constraints, you are going to have to get a GPU that can be powered solely from the motherboard. And if you have a small form factor PC, you may need to get a half-size GPU bracket. Installation is easy though. Just take these little guys off, throw it in. Man, I'm so good at this. I also put in a 2.5 gigabit NIC because I don't have all day to wait for everything to transfer from my server. Let's see if it turns on. And hey, there we go. Overall, this is actually a super easy build and everything actually worked out perfectly, which is fantastic. I was not expecting my $100 PC to turn on. Now is the scary part, using this thing. I will say, it works well in regular Windows to absolutely no one's surprise. No issues here, even streaming 4K video. It also seems stable enough for me. So let's hop into gaming, download something from Steam, and it's dead. So So this actually happened while I was putting this video together. My 120 gigabyte cheapo SSD just straight died randomly and everything on it was completely gone. I reached out to customer support who informed me there is a 1-year warranty and then promptly ghosted me. So I took yet another SSD I had lying around and threw it in there for the sake of the video. I'm not sure if this was a fluke and I just got unlucky or if this SSD brand sucks, but keep in mind this is an old PC, so things do tend to happen. Let's just get it started up, and it won't start. Fans will only spin. So my RAM that I bought used just last year died on me. So after some more RAM, because Jesus, I just need a new hobby, it's time to boot her back up and get to gaming, hopefully. So first off, Minecraft, because it is easy, and to pretty much no one's surprise, Minecraft ran amazingly well in 1.19, 12 chunks render, 8 chunks simulated. I got a good bit of stuttering when loading new worlds though and generating new chunks, but frankly, if I could have run Minecraft like this back in 2012, I would have cried. So don't complain. After that, I tested the basics like Portal 2, which runs amazing, and BeamNG. Since Beam is a pretty CPU intensive game, it was the first game to give me some issues, and I know it will not be the last, unfortunately. I had to run on lowest settings and it still struggled, and overall just wasn't a great experience. The really sad part is my laptop actually runs BeamNG better than this. After that, I tried BioShock Infinite, came out in 2013, but hey, it's a fun game. That ran really well. 1080p, medium settings, 40 to 60 FPS in the intro areas, super good experience. Next up, Metro Last Light Redux. I did the medium benchmark 1080p, settings are right here, and got average FPS in the high 30s, which is pretty playable in my opinion, especially if you're willing to drop 1 or 2 settings or your resolution to get a solid 60. Dolphin runs great if you want to do some game cubing, although it looks like you won't be as lucky with Wii games as Skyward Sword struggled to run well. PCSX2 was just barely able to run at native resolution, but it did run. I got Jak 3 and Ratchet & Clank to run pretty smoothly without really much of any setting tweaks, thankfully. I was also able to get Halo Reach in the Master Chief Collection to run at 1080p original settings, around 40 to 50 FPS. And you probably could get a solid 60 if you really wanted to by lowering the resolution scale a little bit. Although Metro Exodus proved to be a little bit too much and really wasn't able to have any sort of a playable experience. But Fallout 4 could run decently on low settings. Not the worst experience, but it could maintain a solid 30, 45 FPS or so. Some areas would stutter on loading. And lastly, GTA 5. That was also a little bit too much for our poor GTX 650. At lowest settings 1080p, the 1GB of VRAM wasn't cutting it. I had to make the error go away, as I do with all error messages. But it was actually able to get between 40 and 60 FPS for the most part, surprisingly, in the benchmark. And honestly, it doesn't even look too bad overall with the low settings. So you know what? I'll call that a win somehow. I also, unfortunately, did run Cinebench R23. Got a score of 2435, which is pretty depressing. But hey, it finished. I also did a Blender BMW run, which got about 7 minutes, 30 seconds. And lastly, I did want to touch on video editing shortly, since that is what I like to do with my computers. I decided for this, I was just going to put down a few 4K clips on the timeline with low quality proxies, a light color grade, and I don't know, maybe I'll put multiple clips on the screen at once, whatever. Overall, with the proxies, you can actually edit pretty basic video on this. It's just with that base 120GB SSD, you really can't store much of anything on there, especially since Windows is on there because it's the boot drive. In fact, you could probably hardly store a single one of my videos on the SSD, because sometimes my videos now get close to 100 gigabytes total, and I'm not even shooting RAW or anything crazy, it's just regular 4K. If you do plan on using this PC for more content creation rather than gaming, I would personally consider something like a Quadro K2000 or K4000 instead of the GTX 650. It's a similar price, and you get an extra gigabyte or 2 of VRAM, which for video editing really is a godsend. I would also consider potentially getting a bigger SSD or maybe even a hard drive, because can't store nothing on this thing. There is one major downside though to building a PC this cheap. You basically have no upgrade path at all. The power supply has a custom pinout for some reason along with the motherboard, so if you have to upgrade one or the other, you have to upgrade the other one. Unless you want some jank adapters that you'll eventually have to throw away when you upgrade anyways, just creating needless e-waste. And this is also DDR3. That's 2 RAM generations old now. So any CPU upgrades means new motherboard, new RAM, new power supply, and CPU. And well, now your GPU is bottlenecked too. So pretty much you can find another low power GPU to throw in here, like a GTX 1050 Ti, maybe a 1650, and add more RAM, maybe PCIe storage. But that's about all you're going to get. I will say though, another amazing thing about this PC, since I didn't get a small form factor PC, you could throw in either some new or used hard drives like these 6TB Seagate Exos drives I got on eBay for $50 a piece. You could easily just plop these in there and get 12 terabytes of raw storage. So if you do go this route with your next PC or even your first PC, and you do have to build a whole new system to upgrade eventually, at least you can get some functionality out of the old one. So yeah, I guess you can build a $100 PC if you have $113 and are willing to risk parts potentially dying on a whim. But I personally would argue you probably shouldn't. I myself would try and save up another $100, maybe get something with 6th gen i5, something Skylake with DDR4, and potentially a GTX 750 or 750 Ti, just so you have a little bit more room to upgrade. Or if possible, maybe I would save up and look to spend $500 and maybe get a 14 core monster of a PC next time.